Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be back, boy, I'll tell you. I thought we'd be doing this last week, so I lost a few days in the process, but I'm delighted to see so many of you in kind of tough weather challenges to expect everybody to show, and some people just aren't in town anyway. The context of what we're talking about fits great with what Pastor Bob started with, not where he finished up, but what he started with today. When we look at Genesis, that kind of sets the stage in the thinking of the clash that is presumed between religion and science. I'm going to want to change that around from time to time in our discussion, because it's really not about religion per se. The test is about scientific findings versus religious teachings. The religious teachings, of course, then we have another word for that on a grander scale. We call it theology. So it's really boiling down to what does your faith, or what does this particular connection in American history of churches, what do they teach, and is there really a clash or is there not? Historically, the idea of science versus religion doesn't work at all, and yet it's one of the oldest ways of looking at these two subjects that there is. So in about 2 weeks, what I want to do is zero in on that and talk about some of the derivation of that. Where did this come from? Why are we still carrying on? Well, there's one obvious elephant in the phone booth here, and we all know it because it's a part of our lives. It shows up in headlines even still today, and that is one specific part of science that has become kind of accepted lore now. It's not something that if you're a scientist, you're very likely to dispute. What am I talking about? What's the doctrine that sticks in people's craw if they're fundamentalist, traditionalist, right-wing, whatever term you want to use in their theology?
Evolution.
Evolution. There's really two parts to it.
Evolution? No?
Yeah. So you've got that branch which goes off into the Genesis story, which Bob was talking about at the start today. And then you've got the whole idea of evolution. So what I'm going to do today is show you probably America's premier scientist of the past 20 years at least, and maybe longer. I don't know if the guy that I'm going to show, Francis Collins, has any peers going back all the way to Einstein. Certainly no one has had the breadth of involvement that he has had. He's the fellow that got tapped from the government side, that is to say the National Institutes of Health, for heading up the Human Genome Project. And what that entails, he'll talk about, and it's absolutely mind-boggling. When I was doing research, to get ready for this particular discussion about is there warfare between religion and science, in general preparation, I stumbled on this. I didn't expect to see him. And he talks about his journey as a thinking individual, not just as a scientist, from atheism as a scientist all the way to Christianity. And it's a fascinating journey, and he'll walk you through that. I'm going to try and cut out a few minutes so that we can get most of his talk in, if not all of it. The one that I'm going to show you is his discussion right here in town, or next to there, to Caltech. He's got an overflow crowd at Caltech. Stop and think about that. one of the nation's premier institutions of science and engineering, and he's telling students, they know what he's going to talk about. He's at a forum called the Veritas Forum. Veritas translates out of Latin to
Truth.
yeah.
Truth.
And so he's saying, let me tell you about my journey. I'm going to cut out his childhood where he talks about how he grew up, but you can go back and find it on YouTube. I actually like the earlier version of it. I thought it was later because it seemed more developed to me as I watched it. He does the same thing under the same banner at Berkeley. And that's a really good session too. His name is Francis Collins, and he tells the story of the Human Genome Project, and he calls DNA, if you're ready for this, he writes a book and he calls it The Language of God.
Really? Huh.
This is how God does his thing.
Wow.
And he uses that learning, which we didn't have 50 years ago, to say Darwin was right. But that doesn't rule out God being involved in it. And so when he gets there, he uses some jargon that I want to just alert you to, because we'll come back and talk about it. But I don't want it to just fly by you. I want you to see that he's using. So the question then is, are these two in fundamental discord? Is the only time that they can get together when hell freezes over?
That's good. That's good.
We're going to be there today, and I'm going to let you look at that. Famous song of the 70s, maybe you recognize the lyrics. What we're doing is we're tying together last year when we started seeing modernism versus fundamentalism, and what we will finish this year with, if it goes as I kind of plan and expect it to do, what are the successors to those positions? What is the successor to fundamentalism? And it's called evangelicalism. And that's an interesting term of art. And it has one progenitor. You already know the name of the guy who kind of leads that charge and makes a distinction, but he's still close to them and they still identify with him. Who's the primary fellow that we think of in that context in our time? Who's the most prominent preacher?
Billy Graham.
Yeah.
Billy Graham.
Yeah. On the other side, there's a reaction to that, and it's much more prominent than you would expect. And it caught everybody by surprise on the East Coast, and it becomes neo, meaning new, neo-orthodoxy. And a fellow named Reinhold Niebuhr sets that stage. And these, again, countervailing trends are what's going to be on the scene while all of us in here are growing up. That's what the background is for what's happening. Okay? Have I lost you, or do you see in general where I'm trying to go with this? Okay. Here's the terms that I want you to be ready for. Creationism, creation science that follows it. This is just basically anti-evolution. It's repackaged. It doesn't sound like something you want to sign up for if it has that inconvenient anti built into it, right? That doesn't sound like something I don't want us to travel under the banner of something that it's against. I want to be for something. Basically, it's the same thing. And it's going to go through a series of repackaging. And of all things in our world today, think about this. The Supreme Court kept knocking it down and saying, you guys are trying to camouflage religion and call it science. And we're not going to let you do that. And so what we'll do maybe 2 Sundays from now is talk about how that developed and what those tests were all about. So, kind of the modern version of something that started way before there was an evolution controversy, natural theology, natural philosophy, is the idea of intelligent design. They said, okay, maybe we can't talk about creationism or creation, but let's package it again and let's call it intelligent design. Now, since it's coming out of, modern acronym days and in the context of jingoism and having a way to say, let's sign up for this cause and so forth, we need a shortcut, we need a shorthand that everybody can march under. Then they don't have to think about it all the way through. Maybe we'll just call it ID.
Yeah.
And it's what's going on when I started teaching. That's the big rallying point. It's still there today.
Yep.
It's still the big terminology that you want to look at. You can get it from a whole bunch of different branches, but it all boils down to the same thing. And it really goes back to the Scopes trial. It really goes back to that time when those who are not liking what they're hearing coming out of the scientific community are saying, you can do that if you want. We don't believe it, we don't want it, but you cannot teach it in schools. Now, why is that important? Because at the turn of the century, we started building high schools. We started saying we're going to educate kids all the way up through 12th grade. And by the time of the Scopes trial, there were many, many million kids who were encountering science for the first time. And in backwoods America, all of a sudden they were coming face to face with this. And they're not liking it at all. And within another dozen or so years, it had doubled again. So what's fascinating is Scopes, everybody thought, meant that fundamentalism and this line of logic was shoved down, defeated, discredited, back in the corner go sulk. But there was a side effect. It's kind of like squeezing the balloon and something pops up that you hadn't expected on the other side. What pops up on the other side is, guess who writes the textbooks in America? Private publishers. Guess what they don't want to do?
They don't want to lose money.
They don't want to publish something that schools won't.
Buy.
If they won't buy it, we don't want to print it. So the net result of this, which is just crazy to think about, is Catholics found a way around that, and they're the only ones, really, who wound up embracing evolution and had the best science teaching, basically, for 50 years. One big thing came across to change it. Earl probably knows it. Think about when some of us who are retired in here were just getting into high school. What was the biggest thing that changed science and math forever in America?
Crick.
We're going beep, 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 beep.
Satellite.
What is it?
Sputnik.
Sputnik. Yeah. Yeah. And so we studied and discovered we're doing a crummy job of teaching science and math, and we got to update it. So the controversy continues to go on. All right. One other term that's going to show up, and then I'll shut up,
Gaps.
is called God in the gaps. God in the gaps is the part that says, okay, I'll go with you this far because I can see how you can explain that with science, but you can't explain this. So that must be where God worked, And if you can't explain it away, I'm going to say God did it. The only problem with that is it makes a kind of small God, and he keeps getting smaller and smaller as what happens. Over time,
It's gone.
yeah,
God's gone.
that gap narrows and narrows and narrows because we learn more stuff. But it's a very popular theory because it says the unexplainable is where God resides. I can let you get away with X, Y, and Z, but not A, B, and C. and when A, B, and C is solved. And what you're going to see in Francis Collins's is a whole lot started getting solved with the Human Genome Project that we did not expect to see. It's amazing stuff. And guess where we go next week? Right where he's talking about. All right, I've got a handout here that I want you to take. I hope you get a chance to read it, because this is an NPR document where the Pew people, if I remember right, got together reporters, writers, some of whom we've talked about before here, and did kind of an annual survey on where are we in this controversy. And he's kind of one of the featured writers. He gets to go first. I'll recommend the whole interview to you, but it'll take you a half an hour to an hour to read it. You can get it online real easily, but I've asked the office to print the part that Francis Collins talked about, so there it is. And we're back here next week, and we're going to go into that original knowledge or original language part and have maybe an even more entertaining speaker, a guy from Texas. See y'all next week.